Well, hello, world, and welcome to another episode of the Crisis Victory Show. Today, myself and Pete Turner, and hi, Pete, we're going to be doing a show where we're going to be interviewing the last segment of the three segments of the journey of somebody who has gone through extreme crisis event, survived the event, and then in the end, their life becomes more of a humanitarian scaled lifestyle. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Pete at this time, and Pete's going to be hosting the show. And also like to always mention that Pete Turner is also the founder of the Break It Down show, and I always ask people to watch his show too. So Pete, I'm turning it over to you, my friend. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Hal. Thanks for sitting with me. I appreciate it. Yeah, we have been going through these stories of people that have had extreme crisis events. And with that comes a lot of challenges. One, when you publish these things to a place like YouTube, they're like, oh, hold on, you're talking about rape and sexual abuse and all these other things. We have to tamp down the access, to these kinds of stories. Right. We're not telling them to sensationalize them. We're telling these stories to illustrate, this human condition and how we progress. And we'll get into the progression part for your story here in a minute. But I wanted to start off with the post-traumatic stress of being sexually abused, of being raped, of being in a gang and being shot at and have your life marginalized. All these things that we have learned, being imprisoned wrongfully, all these things that
in combat,
tremendous and combat.
Yes, absolutely.
That caused not only this emotional response, but like I know in my case, my PTSD, a lot of it is a physical response. My brain responds differently now to what it senses as danger. And I have to slow down and pick not the first response, but the best response to a situation that I'm in, because sometimes there is no trigger that happens. It's just a thing that, my light switches on and it's impending doom, and I have to restart my day. I have to walk back into the house, walk out the side door, and come out the other door just to rewire my brain. And that sounds ridiculous if you don't have PTSD, but for me, if that big wet blanket of doom lands on my back when I walk out the door, I can pretty much fight through it now. But if I go and reset, it completely changes how I see the day. And I realize that I'm not in danger and there's nothing, but that's every day, every single day, all the time. I have to deal with that, which makes me ultimately want to kill myself all the time. Right. And so when people say things, when people respond in these ways, this is that a manifestation of that PTSD. So let's talk a little bit about even some of the guests that we have and how they struggle. Like a lot of times my first response, and I'm not a violent guy, is violence. I'm like, I want to punch that person in the face. Right. And I mean, like, that's my physical response to these things. So when you have trauma and you act in ways that aren't appropriate for civilized folks day-to-day living, which we all are most of the time, let's talk a little bit about what that manifests like.
Well, thank you, Pete. And I think that's a great way to start this episode. In the first place, the audience should know that both of us are veteran PTSD patients, and both of us have had PTA counseling and work with the VA for quite some time. But getting on to the other factor that he's talking about, were people that have survived sexual assault or people that have survived gang violence, our fellow brother veterans and sister veterans who've survived combat. What we have learned, folks, is that it never, ever goes away. So what you have to be able to do at some point is to pull it out of yourself, take a look at it, talk it down, if you will, and then reinsert it, because that's something that's not going to leave you, but you need to find a way to make peace with that at some point in time. This is also applicable to anybody that was non-military that has survived a gang assault or survived a rape or prostitution, the world of prostitution, or other commodities that line up with the type of incidents that occur in people's lives that culminate into a PTSD effect. I think we had some pictures in there, didn't we, Pete, of that we were going to share on the PTSD segment. And I think it's important to identify. That's me right there. I'm a PTSD patient with the Everett branch of the Veterans Administration in Everett, Washington. And then I have one with a friend of mine. That's me on the street. Yeah, this here is Captain Robert. Captain Robert committed suicide November before last. He gave me a call. We've been brothers together for over 20 years. We were at a ceremony together in 2003, where along with 5 other veterans, we were all recognized for men who had been captured. on foreign soil in the service of our country, surviving being tortured, for surviving many, many things. Well, he carried those skeletons all the way from his captivity in the Vietnam War. God rest his soul. He just couldn't take it any longer. He called me up to tell me that he loved me, told me to please don't stop by. I'm in this right now, and he did it right then. So I've also worked with people on the streets that have gone through similar circumstances where they'll call me up or they'll be brought over here in an overdose state. I think we have a picture of that too, a lady on the floor. And this is advanced PTSD to the ultimate, where this is a near-death experience. And I get 2 to 3 of these a year brought to my residence where they'll be unconscious. And they're brought to me instead of a hospital, Pete, because these people have felony convictions. Their spouse or whoever they're with that brings them here knows that I'm not going to call the police or turn them in unless it's a 911 issue of certain death. And so far, so good. I haven't had any of those, but I do understand that form of PTSD for the addicted and afflicted community that we serve out here. They have other paranoias that they deal with that can cause the ultimate suicide. And I do believe that a lot of the fentanyl overdoses are accidental, but I do know also from dealing with that community for 19 years now that some of the people take it to end it. So it's a real struggle. And PTSD is something that people should not be ashamed of, because the PTSD comes from surviving a major crisis event in your life. And what we have to do after they survive such an event is to reconstruct them in a positive sense, rebuilding up their self-esteem, rebuilding up their confidence, if you will, to take that knowledge of what they have gone through and what they have survived and to escalate it into a humanitarian sense. And that's the word.
I wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about the shame as that goes with this too. If you've been sexually abused or kidnapped, and we've had guests that have talked about these things.
Yes.
You have shame because you were overwhelmed and you weren't able to free yourself because it wasn't possible. It doesn't mean you accept that though. So, you want to create an alternate reality where maybe you tell a lie about how strong you were in that moment or whatever it was. Let's talk a little bit about that shame and trying to reconcile with something that's unreconcilable.
Well, that's excellent that you brought that up. We've had somebody in our life that we have talked to in the past year that went through a very similar circumstance. That as they were sharing their story, they were unveiling, if you will, another alternative non-reliability, if you will, on the circumstance that they created within their own mind. And that's why we post at the beginning of our shows to understand that people that are suffering with PTSD have different coping mechanisms. And sometimes they will create a fantasy world or a falsehood. And we don't have a way to really discern truth from the false part of their story. But what we do want to do is alert people to the fact of why they do that. And that's really important, Pete, because I don't think it's intentional in some of the people we've interviewed. And I myself did an interview here about 5 months ago in Los Angeles where all kinds of comments were made that, oh, that guy's making it up and this and that and other. It didn't matter that I sent a ton of information down there verifying my entire story. What mattered was how so many people have a struggle or a problem with accepting a person's personal story because they have not encountered or experienced any of those events in their life. And we have to have patience also in introducing this type of study, this type of work, this type of understanding to a non-educated community with regard to the approach and being able to deal with people with extreme PTSD events. So I really feel strong on that issue that it's not saying to take everything with a grain of salt. It's saying to understand first what caused the affliction and then listen to their heart pleading it out, because that's what that is, Pete.
There's certain physical we'll talk more about sexual abuse right now.
Yeah.
So there's certain manifestations you can see in behavior. You can see the kind of choices that people make and you go, oh, there's probably some sexual abuse in that person's past. And it can adjust. If you're attuned to it, you could adjust how you approach that person.
Yeah.
There is there is a responsibility for that person though to try to evolve past this. So when you're counseling someone who is fabricating a hero story or whatever it's going to be,
Yes.
they've got to get better too, right? For their own good and to blend in with society better and not, be someone who now has shame of lying on top of the shame of the abuse.
Right.
How do
Right.
you help that person uh,
Well, that's a very
improve
good
who they
question.
are, especially if they've done terrible things themselves?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'll tell you exactly how you do. You have to turn them into the direction of truth. And the way that I do that is I sit there and I confront a question in confidence between myself and whoever it is that's opening up to me with their trauma. When I know or I sense or I detect an untruth, I bring them back to that moment of what they're discussing there and pulling the truth out of them as a result of exposing it. We don't want to enable people to live a false life or a false lifestyle. What we want to do is be able to work them through whatever reason is causing them to complicate their life by living in an unrealistic fashion that they portray to all of us. You and I have been around neurolinguistics, the understanding of body movements, the understanding of certain verbiages that are given. So it's a little bit different for us. We can pretty much spot someone lying or fantasizing right off the gate. But not everybody out here, Pete, has that ability to see it. And then what happens is they become disheartened towards people that have PTSD experiences.
Right.
They don't understand the enormity of the impact. All they're seeing is something that they're not comfortable with observing, either in conversation or in physiological activity. So yeah, we have to make sure that they understand that we see their truth and that we see their mistruth. But we can also do that in a complementary way. And I've had my doctorate for 21 years now. I've done it specifically working in outreach services through the church, homeless, the destitute, the afflicted, da 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 da. And even with all these decades of doing that type of work, you have to impart compassion, if you will, an understanding as to the why they are in a directive of remaining in a fantasy, if you will, type lifestyle. And a lot of it, Pete, boils down to self-ego, low esteem issues. They don't look at the fact that they survived a crisis event. What they look at is the damage the event did to them, and they'll tend to play on that. What we want to do is redirect that with this show, this program, and show them that, hey, you have survived this amazing moment. Let's take that knowledge and wisdom now and help others survive the same. And that is why we created this show.
Back to the well one more time, because these things
Sure.
are always more complex than we want them to be, right? So directing them towards the truth and everything else,
Yes.
that's not an instant fix, right?
Nor is it an easy one. Nor is it an easy one.
Right. So there's a lot of failure involved. And again, especially if that person has repeated the assault that's happened, which happens so often. It's a legacy of these things. And so you're constantly creating new wounds because you have this, this drive, this compulsion, this inability to control because of the trauma. It's as if look, I had my ankle rebuilt earlier this year. But for 20 years, I carried this, ankle that was screwed up around, and, it would re-injure itself all the time because it already was injured, right? And I don't want to justify bad behavior, right? But we do have to understand that if a person takes this hit, I always say, if you saw my PTSD on my chest right here, you'd be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Let me help you, and it would be a different response than like when my ankle was hurt and I had a boot on, everybody's like, oh my gosh, let me get this door for you. Everybody wanted to help me because we could see it. And so let's talk a little bit about, again, the different sides of this, the personal side of the person who has this damage and they continue to do the damage and they have shame from that, and trying to work through that to stop doing the thing that is that they're abusing other people with or whatever it is. And then also, if you live in that person's world and there is that lack of truth, there is that abuse that's coming from them, how do you reconcile that? Because they too are being abused.
That's a really good question, Pete. What I tend to do with people that I'm working with that are kind of stuck in that position or that post in their life is also to not only confront the moment that I recognize that they're going down a wrong path, but to bring up an alternative of that path that they're looking at, show them another option that they have that they may or may not be aware of. Another type of PTSD that we need to discuss is the type that happens not to you or to somebody immediately in your life, but something you may observe. You in combat, myself in my captivity and imprisonment in foreign country, being tortured daily. The years I worked in the drug cartels before I was recruited by the DOJ, and all of the horrific things that I've seen and encountered, and no amount of medicine that they give you keeps those dreams out of the mind at night. So what I do is, like I had stated earlier, is if I wake up and I'm in that moment, I'll pull it out of myself. I pull it out. I take a look at it, Pete, and then I redirect the process of how I'm going to reinsert it back into myself. It sounds very complicated and very complex, but fortunately, Pete and I, ladies and gentlemen, have really good PTSD doctors through the VA, and everything in the healing and the recovery of PTSD, which will go on the rest of our lives. It comes in stages of recovery, and then, Pete, right or wrong, recognition. You have to recognize the symptoms. And with me, the sound of a certain click, like when I had the gun put to my head, with the bag over my head, they were pulling that trigger repeatedly. I hear that click, I go catatonic to this day, and that was over 20 years ago during my first captivity. I've been captured twice. So anyway, these type of things are very, very important to, in the moment that we come into that experience and that thought, and I know you can support this statement, is to examine the thought and then redirect the processing. The redirection is to put your mind into another form of thought, something positive, something memorable. Force that other one to kind of exit the mindset that you find yourself in. When I hear that click, that sounded so familiar to me, and I get into that, the state exactly. I can tell you've gone through it.
Yeah.
You just go into an almost catatonic freeze. What I do immediately now, because of my years of being counsel for it, is to redirect thought. And that's what I want to tell the audience, Pete. Redirect thought and condition yourself to be able to be capable of redirecting thought. And can you add to that?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking of examples while you were talking. Two of the most terrifying times of my life weren't actually dangerous to me. One of them was because we got mortared a lot. You can just barely hear a mortar right before it blows up, and it's kind of fluttering in, right? And this is not a sound that you hear if you've only been mortared once. Like, you learn to hear it, and so as that football is flying through the air, it's got some wobble to it. So my partner walks across the front of our Land Cruiser that we were driving, and it's got a hood ornament, and he feathered it with his hand, and it went brrr, and I almost jumped out of the car.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Millisecond, I thought it was a mortar coming in right on top of us, right? Because that sound was so close. And so that kind of triggering is in there. So when you do hear that click, when you hear that flutter, when you hear that, whatever that sound is, I know the shape of explosion sounds. Like, oh, that's us shooting out. Oh, that's us blowing something up. Oh, that's them blowing something up. I know those sounds because I've heard them a lot. And so things like fireworks for me they're not as problematic as they are for some other people, but I understand why they feel that way, because you're like, oh my gosh, that is just, it's too close. And the sounds are amazing how much they can impact us. It is a real thing. I wanted to go back to the well one more time, because that examination of the reality, me, when I walk back into the house and go out the side door to try to reset myself, one of the things I've learned is that, like, if something hurts in your body, you can focus your mind on the point of the pain. And that allows me to understand what's there and how much of that pain is fear. And then I can shrink that pain down. This sounds impossible, but it is true. Like, when you deal with Eastern medicine and other kind of ways of looking at some of the pain in our body, you can go, okay, you meditate on it and say, okay, my knee hurts, and the part of my pain in my thigh is not really there. And I'll even touch my thigh, and I'm like, actually, there is not pain there, and so you can micro focus on something. Right. And so the fear that your body responds with can exacerbate your look, I'm not a PhD in this stuff. I just learned it, like you said, through the VA and understanding how to cope. And some of that coping is me realizing what's real and what's not. And so being able to focus in on where, and it takes courage to do this, where that negative thing is, then you can understand the scope of it, and then you can deal with it and not deal with the things that aren't really there or aren't worthy of your attention and not as scary, because you're like, most of this stuff is just extra stuff. If I can focus here, not easy to do though.
No, but that's what we were discussing earlier on in the conversation, where I was talking about how you have to take that monster and pull it out and examine it. And you just hit it on the head. That's exactly what you do. And that is the process that we need to try to integrate into the people in our lives, or that are brought into contact with us, an option, an alternative to that type of solution. Because as you know yourself, 7 months ago, I was walking down the hall to commit suicide. And the only reason I didn't commit suicide was something triggered within me to call the VA hotline, the suicide hotline, and say, hey, I'm in trouble. And the reason was I was having constant night after night after night. And I talked to you about this, of being in the jungle again, of being in that captive situation of what they were doing to us, the way that we were being tortured, and the expectation of death was constant the entire time of captivity. And they were moving us from dry camp to dry camp, every 3 or 4 or 5 days. I don't remember anymore, but it wasn't for a few days. And every time we got moved, we didn't know if we were being moved for our demise or what. This is a recurrent situation that even a week ago, I called the VA and talked to my doctor. I had another bad dream. It didn't go away. And when I woke up and I'm trying to talk myself down from it, I was really, really struggling, because sometimes these dreams, these memories become real in those moments. Do yours? I know mine do. I come out of it, brother. I'm there. I'm right there in that spot. And so my advice to the audience that's listening to this and trying to get an understanding of the the PTSD syndrome that so many of us face in life today is: 1, recognize it; 2, seek counseling, most importantly; and 3, environmental change. Whatever it could be in an environment where you're staying in a depressed state of being and reliving the experience, you need to alternate that environment. Do you have anything to add to that, Pete?
Well, I want to ask another little bit more of an expanding question, so we can explore just a little bit more here. When we look at the damage incurred through PTSD, and as we try to work on ourselves, we're going to make mistakes. The people around us have to understand that. And again, seeing the wound and understanding the level of damage that's there. And maybe the best thing for that person who loves that person is to have distance, because they can't help that person get through the thing that they're at, in the state that they're in. Maybe give them a chance later on. But it's hard to, when someone's violently, I agree. It may not be. Some work is not our work, right? Some work belongs to somebody else. And so if your work to get better, you and I are both this guy. I get called when, so-and-so took their life. And I'm like, God damn it. Now I have to go deal with not their life, but, I've got to maybe notify somebody, or they just want to tell someone. And so I gather these souls as part of, who I am in my network and everything. We often want to just call me before the end. And the thing I say is you can't wait until someone's at the end of their rope, hanging on with one hand. They don't have a hand free to call you. You have to get in front of these things. You have to encounter the person, as long as it's healthy for you and the other person to do so. But if they refuse to do the work to get better, and look, I lost my brother to suicide. He was compelled. Yes. It was crazy. He went from being relatively, a modern look. If you saw him from the outside, all stable and normal. He had some problems with addiction and alcohol, but some of that was because of his past stuff. And so he was struggling to want to stay alive and to be pushed. And this is a really tough dude, super, super tough. And he lost that fight. And when we judge people who take their lives, sometimes we don't realize it. If you knew that person had stage 4 cancer and they died, you'd be like, well, they were very sick. My brother was very sick, and we weren't able, despite all of these things, to save him. When you have these persistent dreams, and I have dreams, they wake me up and I'm awake. Now I'm awake. I'm going to go over. You and I will text sometimes earlier in the morning.
Because, we have. So we're fortunate in that regard, because we have somebody in our life that we can entrust with that moment of damage that we're surviving. And the thing about your brother, by the way, I'd like to tell you, I'm very sorry about the loss to you and your family. I remember when you first told me about that, Pete, and I'm very, very sorry you experienced that.
It's crazy.
I'm dealing with one this Sunday. I'm going to be saying a prayer of peace to probably more than 1,000 people on stand at my second mother's memorial that I just lost 2 weeks ago. And a woman of 25 years that I'm grieving right now. Yeah, that's her right there. Just this is a very, very hard one. And I work, as you know, in the ministry of hospice. I've got 24 years doing hospice counseling. And I want to start moving into, yeah, there you go, the work there. I want to start moving into that now, showing people the positives of surviving PTSD
Sure.
and whatever crisis event they went through. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, ladies and gentlemen, what Pete's putting up on the screen for you right there is the culmination of work that has now manifested as a result of the crisis victories that I've had in my life, surviving the things I've survived. Instead of going the other direction with it, there's a sense of gratefulness that we came through something like that. And then there becomes a sense of sharing. And in my 13 years of college and seminary to get my doctorate, I knew from day one that I wanted to be able to work in the field of counseling in this regard and have an extensive understanding. Because when, like Pete said earlier, sometimes we have to pull ourselves away from somebody as a result of the possibility of actually damaging them instead of helping them. And Pete, you're so right about that. We can't cure the world. We can't save every single one. But as those pictures defined right there that you just showed, you know that I became a certified hospice counselor while I was a federal prisoner in the federal prison system 28 years ago. And I took 26 prisoners through the dying process. And by the time that I got released and went back to the world that we have today, I was already well ingrained into the art of working in bedside cases, not only dealing with the dying patient, but dealing with the people that would be grieving right after the patient passes. So this, folks, is a benefit that came from surviving a crisis event. And I really want to make the show focus on that today for so many of you that are dealing with the current lifestyle that you may find yourselves in. That listen, instead of going down on yourself about it and having a low self-esteem approach to it, take a look at the wisdom that you have acquired that you can now share to the world in a positive and humanitarian basis. And Pete, this guy here, folks, Pete, my co-host, you know, he is a man that has survived many traumatic things on foreign soil in combat. And what he does now today is like this show. He got involved with this because he's reclaiming his experiences and saying, listen, let's show the world that we don't have to live in that moment of depression, in that moment of struggle, in that moment of fear. Let's bring other people into the forum, Hal, and let's get their stories out there and show their successes. And that's what we do. And it's wonderful, isn't it, Pete?
It is. And I wanted to take, I wasn't quite done with the other part, but I think I can bring it right back gracefully. Let me see if I can land this thing. One of the things my brother struggled with, it was COVID. It's a very tough time on top of everything else, was he did not have the ability to put himself in front of his family. And so he's like, I have to have a job. I have to work. And I'm like, one time in the world when you don't have to work, when you can get a pass and your house payment is really, you know, down the road, you don't have to worry about it. There's going to be forbearance, you know, they're going to help. He could not let it go. When you have your recurring dreams, you are able to call the VA and say, hey, I need help, because as we age, our illness evolves. Our ability to deal with our illness evolves. Maybe it gets better, maybe it gets worse. You know, I'm going to go in for cataract surgery, right? My right eye all of a sudden got better, and then the cataract showed up. And so I'm not afraid to call the VA and say, hey, I've got a problem. And so whenever we do these things, it really is like going to the gym. You know, you have to go get physically fit. We understand that. We have to save money for the future. We understand that. But this well-being requires constant adaptation. I don't like group therapy. You and I have had to talk about group therapy. I don't like group therapy. I don't really care for it either. But if it ends up being the answer, then I better be open to trying it. And it's okay to say, you know what, I tried it again. I didn't like it. I'll try it again next year. I'll try one-to-one counseling. I'll try peer counseling. I'll try all these things. And you and I both know, like, there's these exorcisms you have to have sometimes. I've got my friends that will say, I can't shake this thing. You've done so well to get past this, you know. And so we do an exorcism. We just drudge it all up. And I'm not a professional, but I understand who they are. And we're able to deal with these things. This is what helps people get through to that crisis victory, where you can get like us, where we're able to talk about this. I'm able to say openly, I have an urge to kill myself every day. I'm not in danger today. We'll see how tomorrow goes, but everything's okay. I've learned how to deal with it, you know? And so, and you've been in crisis with that stuff as well. And we learned to overcome it. And we learned that, like, hey, that gate that we're about to go through, that means there's no way back through. I know how to navigate up to that gate and get away from it today. Maybe that'll change in 10 years. Who knows? Right. But I'm always looking at that. And I treat it like it's the most important thing in my life, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have a life.
I'm so glad you brought us back to that. thank you for regrounding that particular part of this topic today. With regard to your brother and the path that he taken, when you identified that there was only so much that can be done by people familiar. Folks, what Pete's trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need to redirect in other ways that we're not familiar with. We need to look at other environmental possibilities, because if we are struggling and we don't feel a confidence in the people that we entrust with these type of knowledgeable circumstances, then we need to find a way and figure out a way to get on that other path that we can become comfortable with and familiar with. Is that pretty much what you were trying to?
Yeah, and to fight hard
That's how I
for
took it.
yourself. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
to
that
not
other
be
path
afraid to
correction.
try things. Right,
Yeah,
exactly. So
exactly.
maybe you do need to adjust your meds. Maybe you need to get off meds. Maybe you need to get on, and
Exactly.
you can talk to your therapist. A while, my therapist and I were stuck from my point of view. And so someone I love advised me, like, well, how hard would you fight? And I'm like, well, I'd go in and address it directly. She's like, well, then address it directly. And so
Right,
and I'm
right,
like,
right.
I love that we're working on this, but I feel like we're stuck. Why do I feel that way? Are we stuck? What are we trying to get out of this? And we checked in, and she's like, all right, I'm going to make some adjustments then. We're going to get to work. And we did.
Well, and the answer is easy. What we're trying to get out of it, Pete, is quality of life.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we're seeking. And like I said earlier on in the interview here, we look at people that have survived extreme crisis events in the worlds you and I have been in. And to me, they're all heroes, every single one of them, because
Right.
when you come through something as horrific as war or undercover operations, the things that you and I've done for so many years in our life, that doesn't make you a loser because you're sitting there dealing and struggling with a nightmare existence. It makes you a survivor, a crisis victory event survivor. And my thing has always been, and the strength for my healing and my recovery is to be able to manifest that wisdom and knowledge. So when I identify someone brought to me, or I'm out on the streets and talking to groups of people there, or at one of the trap houses or whatever, I identify immediately. And by being able to do that, I get their trust, I get their encouragement, and then I get their ear. They're willing to listen because they're going, this guy survived a crisis that's similar to the crisis I'm going through in my life right now. Why would I want to listen to a counselor or a doctor or somebody that's never been in my shoes or in my place? So that is where we take this experience of being survivors and manifest it into the humanitarian scale that I've been pushing since the day I started this show. And I can't think of a better way to lift up people with PTSD than to take a look at the knowledge that they have gained as a result of what they have been through, and find a positive directive to help and assist and aid other people in the community that they may know, Pete, are going through that same exact event in their life. But you were right. Go ahead. You were right about your brother, because there comes to a point like that where we have to step back. Maybe it's because we're too familiar, and that creates another form of discomfort to the person in question. And we have to trust to their judgments to some extent, that they're going to be able to find that familiar and safe place to be able to redirect those impulses to. Because it's no joke when you're feeling about committing suicide, taking your life. I've been through it. And I'm here to tell you, it's a thought that stays in the recesses of your mind every single day forever. And as you commented earlier.
The path isn't easy, too, because my brother, he made one of his major attempts. He'd done several attempts before he was successful. But he... again, it's COVID is going on, and he lives, his wife is from Mexico. And so her elderly folks at the time were living with them. And he's like, let's go up to Tahoe and as a family, just be together and just try to, change things. I'm going to be all right. This is his, attitude, because he's tough. And so I said, oh, I'll come by. And I came by, and, I'm like, hey, I can't stay here because it's COVID time. I'm coming from a completely different part of the state. The last thing I want to do is get your in-laws sick, because I love these people dearly. They're great. They're not my grandma and grandpa, but they're my niece and nephew's grandma and grandpa, and I adore
Familia.
Get along great. Yeah, exactly. They are right.
Familia.
And so and it wasn't a decision I took lightly, because I'm like, look, I'm the first guy to be like, that's a risk I can manage, but I didn't know how to manage that risk, and so I'm conflicted still to this day. Like, should I have just stayed and been with him? But ultimately, I can't fix him. And he had problems that I don't have the tools to fix. I can love him, but in that moment, I had to make a decision between exposing people to COVID potentially, because who knew, right?
Exactly.
Trying to be, and so I had to take I had to pick the route that I thought was best, and I'm still conflicted about what I should have done, and I don't know, but that's that path, right? It's hard to know how to help someone, and sometimes you do have to just say, "This is not my battle. I'm here for you. I'll be a support to you."
Yeah.
But I can't do all of this, and I really can't control whether he lived or died. And he couldn't either, frankly. And so we had to find a way to do it. We ran out of, it's just like with cancer. We just ran out of time, and suicide was the outcome.
And not only that, Pete, but every one of us that are PTSD survivors, our PTSD is different from the guy next to us or the girl next to us.
Yeah.
And this is another problem with approaching somebody or confronting with a PTSD affected individual. At some point early on, you have to discern whether or not you're the right direction for that person to come to and download their experiences with. So I'm really glad you put that in the show today. That's very important. So don't think go ahead, please.
Oh, I wanted to, all these things we're talking about as we get better, and I'm going to do the crisscross thing. Like there's a nexus, right, where you're starting to get better, where you can think you can help people. You still have a lot of getting better to do, right?
Absolutely.
It's like when someone goes through something, like I'm fine. You're like, oh, you're far from fine. You're better, but you're not fine.
See that all the time.
Right. Well, I want to bring it back to the crisis victory side. As you are starting to win, we will, like the first thing is, I'm going to start a foundation. And I caution people to say, like, find a foundation that does what you do and go learn the foundation business. Go work with them. Go work with Dr. Hal and go to the trap houses, because you can start your own original thing with you're the force of one, but a lot of places just need your help already. Like imagine if someone could go walk through the trap houses instead of you, or in addition to you, you could do a lot more.
Evolution.
But it's an evolution, right? So go get training from someplace that already does this thing. And I think Lisa Drennan is a great example. We had her on the show.
Yeah, she is perfect for that.
Right. She understands that world. And so if someone wants to come along and reinvent what she's already done, well, maybe go talk to Lisa about what it takes to do that. Because as you get better, you still have a lot more getting better to do. She's further up that getting better path, in her.
Well, she put in her time and grade to get where she's at too, as we both know. And that was actually, folks, that was the maiden interview of this, the Crisis Victory show that he's talking about. So after the show, if you have time, I would encourage you to go to episode 1 and listen to Lisa's story. She's now certified as a counselor in the sex trade industry and working with people that are going through sexual domestic issues. And she's trained and qualified now to do it. But it wasn't an overnight journey for her. It took years. And you're right, Pete. And the thing about taking someone into a trap house, hey, those places are flat out dangerous. You better know a person very well to make sure they are capable of sustaining a gun being pulled on them, like I've had happen to me, and there were a knife being pulled on them, or a physical incident that you find yourself right in the middle of unexpectedly. And also being able to suppress your own personal feelings when you see some young minor girl going in a back bedroom to trade her flesh for another $20 fix. There comes a point of time where you have to be able to survive and not add excess PTSD to the PTSD you're already battling. So therein too lies making sure that you're with someone that knows and understands the consequences of exposure to PTSD related environments. But I love what you said there, Pete, because it is important for us to pass the torch. But we've got to be so careful when we pass that torch, because we also have to protect the caregiver every bit as much as we protect the people that are afflicted. Yeah, and there's Lisa Drennan's episode information right there. Thank you for putting that up, Pete. That's a good one for this episode to share. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'd like to move on now to the third and final stage of the journey that so many crisis victors go through. Stage 1, we survived the crisis victory event. Stage 2 is recovery, recouping, and rebuilding. Stage 3, and the final stage that I'm grateful to say for many years now that I've been, is taking the wisdom of the experiences of whatever event you survive and manifesting it into a directive that is serving other people in a humane scale, helping them become not only upgraded in their personal self-esteems, but now seeing that they have value in life. And that value is to share that experience in a positive sense and to help others redirect the path that they find themselves stuck on. And that's what this program has been about since the day Pete and I sat down and decided to create the Crisis Victory Show, was to show that something good can come out of something bad that you have survived, ladies and gentlemen. And it's very, very important to take that manifestation of knowledge and wisdom and to apply it humanitarily to the community that you're in. Because there are so many people out there that need to hear your story, that need to recognize that you not only survived, but you became stronger as a result of what you have transcended from. Is there something you want to add to that, Pete?
No, I think
You're a
that's
survivor.
exactly
You're a combat survivor, and you're even though you're not in the combat zone today, you have taken that knowledge and that skill, and you have had a couple thousand interviews on the Break It Down show, introducing the world to people like yourself that have survived extreme events. I absolutely love the way you created that show, and it's always positive when it ends. You always show the light at the end of the tunnel, which is exactly what the show is designed to do. So if you're out there, ladies and gentlemen, and if you're struggling with PTSD, if you're struggling with homelessness, if you're struggling with addiction, if you're struggling with the loss and the grieving of somebody very close to you that recently passed, and you're in a path of depression, there is a way to turn that around. The alternative to that is to take that crisis victory experience and use that knowledge to benefit others in your community and in your immediate life. And with that, I'm pretty much wanting to close out the show because I don't want to take too much more. I want them to focus on what we gave them today to think about. So take your experience, survive the experience, and then use that wisdom and that knowledge to benefit humankind. Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today, and I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But, this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego, y vaya con Dios, and go Victors.